On tonight's edition of News Center, President Park lashes out at lawmakers for failing to approve a list of bills, including a counterterrorism bill, while the Assembly Speaker vows to open a plenary session come Thursday. China's chief nuclear envoy for the Korean Peninsula has arrived in the North Korean capital. That's according to media reports out of Pyongyang and Tokyo. And race for the White House begins. Cruz upsets Trump and Clinton campaign declares victory in Iowa. What does that mean, and why are the Iowa caucuses so significant in the U.S. presidential race? Our reporter is live in the studio. It's Tuesday, February 2nd, 2016. Good evening to our viewers in Korea. Hello to those around the world. This is News Center. Now, again and again, but yet once again, President Park urged lawmakers to approve a series of pending bills stuck in Parliament so that necessary reforms can take place, new growth engines can be nurtured, and the economy revived. Our top story tonight from Song Ji-sun.
At the fifth cabinet meeting of the year, President Park highlighted the importance of the bills pending at the National Assembly, underscoring their role in boosting the economy and improving people's livelihoods. Dozens of bills aimed at revving up the service sector, fostering small and mid-sized companies, and implementing reforms remain pending at the National Assembly, some for years, due to a political standoff between the two main rival parties.
각 정당에서 추구하는 가치가 무엇인지, 어떻게 경제를 살릴 것인지 명확한 해답이 없이 비판을 위한 비판은 결코 국민 경제에 도움이 되지를 않습니다. 국민 경제가 더 나아지고 국민의 삶을 윤택하게 할 대안이 있다면 언제든지 받아들일 준비가 되어 있습니다.
She also made note of Seoul's strategy of growth reform. She pointed to the fact it has been rated as the second best among the G20 members, but said the reason it missed the top spot was because several of the related bills are still stuck in the parliament. She also emphasized the need for deregulation, saying that excessive regulations stand as obstacles to new growth engines, and that it's important to act quickly in this fast-paced era of development. Pointing to a recent security scare at Incheon International Airport, the president also called for full readiness in the emergency and security sectors ahead of the upcoming Lunar New Year holiday, or Seollal, which starts this weekend. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
In Parliament, Speaker Chung seems poised to break the stalemate between the rival parties that's kept the National Assembly at a standstill for weeks. But with the end of the current session and the start of a major holiday right around the corner, he really doesn't have much time. Arirang senior parliamentary correspondent Jiyeon reports.
Assembly Speaker Chung Yua has been insisting for weeks that he would not use the authority of his position to bring bills up for a vote. But on Tuesday, he changed his mind.
I will definitely call a plenary session this week. It will either be on the 4th or the 5th. I will use my authority as Speaker to bring the one-shot bill up for a vote, and it will be passed.
The bill is aimed at helping companies that undergo restructuring via deregulation and tax breaks. Chung said he's willing to introduce this particular bill because lawmakers had reached a compromise on it last month. They had been planning to vote on it last Friday, but a last-minute disagreement raised by the opposition over the country's electoral map delayed the plan. The ruling Saenuri Party criticized the opposition for breaking their agreement.
The Minju Party suddenly reneged on our agreement to vote on the corporate revitalization bill last week. This is a disgrace and a breach of the negotiating rules. The party is more focused on the election than on people's livelihoods.
The Minju Party wants the constituency bill passed with the one-shot bill.
I urge passage of the redistricting bill first, and then we can vote on other pending bills. This is not a matter of what comes first. It's the Parliament's obligation. The ruling party should not criticize us as though we're not concerned about people's livelihoods.
The old electoral map expired at the end of last year, and with the parliamentary election in April fast approaching, the issue has taken on greater urgency. The main point of disagreement is over the number of proportional representatives. The Minju Party says it is inappropriate for Chung to introduce the one-shot bill himself when it believes a compromise can be reached between the rival parties. Jiyeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, political maverick Ahn Cheol-soo has launched a new party. The People's Party, with the potential to become the third biggest political camp in the general elections in April, has vowed to shake up the country's long-standing two-party system. Here's Shin Se-min.
Ahn Cheol-soo's People's Party has officially entered the political scene, posing as likely competition for the main opposition. At an inauguration ceremony Tuesday, the tycoon-turned-politician Ahn and independent lawmaker Chun Jung-bae announced they will be jointly leading the new party.
We are on a journey to reform politics and taking a path that hasn't been attempted. We'll fight against the two-party duopoly, and I'll stake all that I have on the election.
As co-chair, Ahn made a public promise to raise the status of the People's Party as the country's third biggest political camp, with hopes of making a mark in the upcoming parliamentary elections. He also reiterated vows to promote reforms, help narrow the income gap, and improve national security to boost public safety. The minor opposition party may have injected some fresh energy into the current state of politics, but its prospects moving ahead are still foggy. It's entering as a new player with just 71 days until elections, which isn't considered much time to lock down support. And compared to already established parties, it could face challenges in terms of getting its vision to resonate with voters. Currently, the party only has 17 incumbent lawmakers, just shy of 3 seats of the majority needed for the party to form its own negotiation group within parliament. A recent survey by local pollster Realmeter shows the People's Party is likely in for a rough ride, as the approval rating fell to 13%, down from 20 2 weeks ago. The focus now is whether Ahn and Chun will be able to get out in front to shift the political landscape or even potentially realign the opposition bloc ahead of the general election scheduled for April 13th. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
China's top envoy for the North Korean nuclear issue has traveled to Pyongyang. That's according to media reports out of North Korea and Japan. The surprise visit comes as the international community ramps up pressure to try and slap tougher sanctions on the North after its fourth nuclear test. Our Connie Kim provides some insights on the possible reasons behind this China-North Korea meeting.
Is China North Korea's sole ally trying to play more of a mediator role between Pyongyang and the international community? Anticipation is high that Beijing will do just that during its unexpected visit to the North. North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency reported that China's special representative for Korean Peninsula Affairs, Woo Da-wei, arrived in the North Korean capital Tuesday afternoon. The details of Woo's trip have not been revealed, but speculations are swirling. It's gaining extra attention since China is believed to hold a critical role in persuading the North to denuclearize after it garnered international condemnation for conducting a fourth nuclear test in January. Woo is expected to meet with senior North Korean officials, including the representative for denuclearization talks. China has been emphasizing dialogue rather than imposing heavy sanctions on the regime. That's why many North Korean watchers believe a proposal for talks could result from this visit.
Pyongyang may discuss a possible return to the six-party talks for a breakthrough with the international community. And since China's been pushing for the resumption of nuclear negotiations, there could be gestures for dialogue.
Experts say another possible reason for Woo's visit is to stop North Korea from another provocation. Pyongyang is on close watch as recent satellite imagery suggests it could launch a long-range ballistic missile abruptly, making it difficult for Beijing to side with the North. With North Korea possibly mulling further threatening acts, Beijing may be looking to lend more positive support to the regime before the situation spins out of control. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, this as in Seoul, the Russian ambassador to South Korea expressed doubts regarding a proposal for five-party nuclear talks, as well as opposition to possible deployment of a U.S. missile defense system on the Korean peninsula. Our foreign affairs correspondent Kwon So-ah has this report.
Russian ambassador to South Korea Alexander Timonin says experience shows that the six-party talks on denuclearizing North Korea are the most effective way to deal with the North's nuclear ambitions. He was responding to a question about whether Russia is still against President Park Geun-hye's proposal for six-party talks without Pyongyang after Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov dismissed the idea last week.
We have a high regard for President Park Geun-hye's approach to matters related to Eurasia and Northeast Asia. But with regard to the North Korean nuclear issue, we don't see much efficacy in holding five-party talks. We still believe that dialogue is the best method of engagement and that five-party talks would isolate North Korea.
China is on the same page as Russia, while the other three six-party talks members, South Korea, the US, and Japan, support the five-party talks idea. Japan is the latest to get on board, with Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida voicing his support during a phone call on Monday with his South Korean counterpart Yoon Byung-se.
Minister Kishida offered a positive assessment of our proposal for five-party talks within the six-party talks framework.
In his remarks to reporters in Seoul on Tuesday, the Russian ambassador also expressed concern about a deployment of the U.S. Army's Terminal High-Altitude Area Defense System on the Korean peninsula. Seoul had previously denied it was considering deployment of the missile defense system, but recently softened its stance with the latest threats coming out of Pyongyang, including the potential for a long-range ballistic missile launch following the state's fourth nuclear test last month.
The placement of the THAAD system won't change things in Northeast Asia, nor will it make the region any safer or help resolve the nuclear issue.
The diplomat also asked that all the concerned parties refrain from any actions that could escalate military tensions, a reflection of Russia's more lenient approach to North Korea. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
The race for the White House is on. After months of preseason skirmishes, the 2016 U.S. presidential election formally kicked off when Iowa held its presidential caucuses, the first nominating contest for both the Democrats and Republicans in the race to the White House. We do have the results, and you too will soon find out. This election is shaping up to be a much more interesting one than expected. Live in the studio with me is our very own Kim Jiyeon. Jiyeon, let's start with the results.
Sure. On the Republican side, Texas Senator Ted Cruz upset the field and rode a wave of evangelical support to victory over Donald Trump. On the Democratic side, it was a really tight race between former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. It was so tight that Clinton won 6 more delegates through a series of a coin toss match. Meanwhile, former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley came in third and ended his campaign. The remaining candidates will now move on to their next battle, a primary next Tuesday in the state of New Hampshire.
Right. It is the first state to vote, but Jiyeon, there's more than that for all this press frenzy when the Iowa caucuses begin.
You're right. A good showing in Iowa, the 30th most populous state, is vital to a candidate's momentum because it's the first state to vote in the nominating contest that lasts until July. Also, historically, no candidate that has finished worse than third in Iowa has ever gone on to win the presidency. Neither the Republican winner in 2008, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, nor the winner in 2012, former U.S. Senator Rick Santorum, managed to win the party nomination. But Iowa Democrats did back the party's last 2 nominees, John Kerry in 2004 and Barack Obama in 2008.
Right. I mean, early states do not anoint the winners. And of course, Iowa, indeed, Jiyeon, has a poor track record of picking Republican candidates. But they do impose a brutal, I suppose, a discipline to in the field, forcing the weakest candidates from the race and really exposing the flaws in the front runners. Right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. And the way caucuses work, of course, it's quite difficult for many of other nationalities to understand because they're different from other democracies that elect their presidents as well, such as Korea.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's because the two parties have different rules and it's hard to follow. But they do seem to have something in common, which is candidate supporters can persuade their neighbors for support. And that's quite different in other countries. Iowa Democrats gather in groups by candidate preference at a caucus site, which may be a school, church, or even a private home to publicly display their support for a candidate. And if a candidate does not reach the threshold of support of 15% of voters, then the supporters are released so they can back another contender. In a Republican caucus, voters write the name of a candidate they support on a sheet of paper that is collected and counted at the site by caucus officials.
Right, so we're only in the very initial stages, and it's probably too early to ask, but I want to ask how these U.S. presidential election results would impact Korea-U.S. relations.
Although it is too early, I've asked a local researcher, and he thinks that whoever becomes the next U.S. president, that it won't have a huge impact that'll change the U.S.-RK alliance, but he did point out that the Democratic candidate, in particular Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, would be a better choice for Korea.
It would be preferable for Asian countries, including Korea, if former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton becomes the next U.S. president, since it's likely that she will pursue a pivot to Asia foreign policy.
The pivot to Asia policy was devised by Clinton when she worked for President Barack Obama's administration during his first term. In order to tell how the dynamics of U.S. foreign politics will shift, the researcher says it's more important to know who's going to be in charge of the president's foreign policy and whether that person's focus will be on Asia or the Middle East rather than looking to a specific candidate or party.
Right. This is a topic that we will revisit in the coming weeks and months leading up to the actual voting day of the U.S. presidential election, which is November 8th. But definitely as of now, Iowa has shaken up this 2016 contest.
And on to New Hampshire, which will probably end several of the candidacies.
Right. We will wait and see how that plays out. Thank you, Jiyeon, for that, for the thorough coverage, and for coming in tonight.
Sure.
The World Health Organization is gearing up to combat the microcephaly outbreak in Latin America linked to the Zika virus, which it feared could spread to Africa and Asia that have the highest birth rates in the world. Now, this following an emergency meeting in Geneva Monday, after which the Global Health Agency declared the mosquito-borne Zika virus a public health emergency of international concern.
I am now declaring that the recent cluster of microcephaly and other neurological abnormalities reported in Latin America, following a similar cluster of French Polynesia in 2014, constitutes a public health emergency of international concern.
Well, the WHO officials say the emergency has been called over the cluster of serious brain defects in unborn babies thought to be caused by the virus. And many countries are on alert, taking independent measures to prevent Zika from crossing into its borders and spreading further. As for Korea, the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention also held a very special meeting to discuss the situation at home, with the best lines of defense right now being heightened monitoring and public education. It's a feature story from Jiyeon tonight.
The Korea Center for Disease Control and Prevention convened on Tuesday to assess the level of local threat posed by the Zika virus. As part of an action plan, it announced it would keep close watch on mosquitoes, the main transmitters of the virus, by studying their presence and movement around the country. It'll also expand public safety campaigns to spread awareness about the virus and infection symptoms, not just for citizens, but also visitors who enter the country. It also started operating a website introducing and explaining the virus. This comes on the back of the WHO's declaration of the virus as a public health emergency of international concern and growing fear. Zika is a mosquito-borne virus that generally causes mild symptoms in adults, including low-grade fever, rash, and red eyes. But it's also been linked to brain deformities in newborns. Outbreaks have historically occurred in remote parts of Africa and the Pacific Islands, but it has quickly spread to South America and other regions since it was found in Brazil in May of last year. There are currently 28 countries that have reported new cases of the virus in the past 2 months. But not everyone is fully aware of information on the virus. And there's real concern about the potential spread of misinformation regarding its effects and how it's transmitted, which is one of the biggest points of misunderstanding.
I heard that the virus could be transmitted through blood transfusions or sexual intercourse. If that's true, the virus could spread more easily and become a really big threat.
Experts say there's a low chance of an infected patient transmitting the virus through blood, such as in transfusions. It's an infrequent mechanism and no cases of this have been recorded. However, there was one report of the virus allegedly spreading through sexual intercourse. In 2008, U.S. biologist Dr. Brian Foy, who had been infected with the virus during his research in Senegal, infected his wife, who had not left the state of Colorado. But experts say evidence of this was not confirmed and data was insufficient to warrant a related warning.
When a patient has a high level of the virus in his or her blood, there's a chance it could spread into other bodily fluids, such as semen, which leads to the possibility of it being transmitted through sexual intercourse. But the chances of this happening are very slim, as a set of extreme conditions has to be met. So it's not likely that person-to-person sexual transmission will become a main route.
But with the virus found in Indonesia on Monday and in other parts of Asia, there are concerns that the virus could eventually find its way into Korea.
It hasn't been long since we've recovered from the Middle East respiratory syndrome outbreak, so if the virus comes to Korea, I think it will create a lot of fear.
Local authorities say there's a very low possibility that the virus will spread in the country.
The mosquito that transmits the virus is the Aedes aegypti, better known as the yellow fever mosquito, which is famous for spreading dengue fever or yellow fever virus. But this mosquito doesn't exist in Korea. We do have the tiger mosquito, which has been known to transmit dengue. But mosquitoes are inactive in the winter, and no cases of Zika have been reported yet.
The Korea CDC and medical experts reiterated the low possibility of the Zika virus spreading in Korea, calling the current phase a stage of concern. But they have prepared measures to deal with suspected cases in order to promptly diagnose patients and follow through with medical support or a quarantine if needed. Jiyeon, Arirang News.
Korea's consumer price growth sunk back into the 0% range last month. The January reading of 0.8% was the slowest pace of growth in 4 months. But there seems to be a pretty big discrepancy when it comes to how people feel about prices and the actual numbers. Our Hwang Ji-hye tells us why.
I'm in downtown Seoul, one of the most bustling districts in the capital city, with no shortage of restaurants. The store rent in this area shot up over 30% in the third quarter last year from a year ago, pushing up costs not only for restaurant owners, but also their customers. So it's no surprise that demand for dining out has remained sluggish on top of a loss of appetite due to the country's feeble recovery momentum. Because of higher rental fees coupled with pricier labor and ingredients, prices on restaurant menus went up over 2% last year.
This growth is in stark contrast with the overall inflation rate that stood at below 1%, explaining why people feel prices are running so high when the actual figures are low.
It feels like prices have risen in general, especially food products.
A radish cost about $1 the day before yesterday, and today, when I went to the supermarket, it was around $1.50. A bundle of green onions was nearly $4.
Regardless of how people feel about these costs, overall inflation continues to sit low. Statistics Korea said Tuesday prices edged up a mere 0.8% last month from a year ago.
Prices in the service and agricultural sectors have risen around 2.4%, but petroleum products and gas prices affected by plunging global oil prices drove down overall inflation.
So while the prices of products linked with oil have dragged down price growth in general, goods and services closely intertwined with people's daily lives climbed significantly more. Experts also say the math in consumer price growth could be done differently.
Generally, when calculating the inflation rate, greater weight is given to product groups that consumers spend more money on, so it's price-based. That means the figure could be more reflective of the consumption pattern of those with high incomes.
With that, some point out there should be a separate price growth figure for low and high income earners to provide a more well-rounded view. 황지혜, 아리랑 뉴스.
The Pentagon has unveiled its budget priorities for next year, and while it will continue fighting extremist groups such as the Islamic State, it wants to focus spending on countering Russia and China. Bruce Harrison is live in the studio with me. Bruce, why are Russia and China in focus?
Hello, Kanyang. The Washington Post reports this is a spending plan to counter technological and military advances by those two powerful countries. And according to the Post, Defense Secretary Ashton Carter is going to make a case today why the rapid buildup of China's military and Russia's intervention outside its borders are a larger threat to the U.S. than that of extremist groups.
So, Bruce, what in particular of each of these countries is driving U.S. defense officials to propose such a spending?
Sure. Well, let's start with Russia. Since 2014, Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, has authorized several incursions into the Ukraine, with Russia ultimately annexing Crimea. More recently, Moscow began backing the Syrian government militarily, including airstrikes, in order to help Syrian President Bashar al-Assad defeat opposition forces. While that includes bombing the Islamic State, the Russians are also reportedly bombing rebel forces backed by the U.S. government. Meanwhile, China continues to threaten U.S. interests in Asia as it expands control of crucial trade routes in the South China Sea. Another reason the Pentagon may be focusing more on China and Russia is because apparently some U.S. military personnel believe it's only a matter of time before the Islamic State falls in Iraq.
All we have to do is keep supporting the Iraqi security forces and helping them bring the fight to the enemy, and we will push the enemy out of this country that I'm standing in right now.
General McFarland added defeating the enemy in Syria is a much more complex task.
Well, Bruce, on a different note, the Greek islanders were among those nominees for this year's Nobel Peace Prize. And I see that of them is a fisherman and an 85-year-old grandmother who was photographed bottle feeding a refugee baby.
Yeah, it was a really famous photograph. And those two are nominated by the Greek Hellenic Society and Greek academics, along with Hollywood actress Susan Sarandon. One of the academics said they symbolically represent the behavior and attitude of Greece, organizations, and volunteers toward the huge refugee crisis.
It's not a coincidence as people are helping. From teachers to ordinary people, they rush to support those who arrive desperate and persecuted from a war that Greece did not cause.
The more than $1 million U.S. award will be announced much later this year in October.
Right, and the deadline for the nominations was Monday, February 1st, and Bruce, a very familiar name has popped up once again.
Sure, someone who's been in the news a lot since around 2009, Edward Snowden, the U.S. spy agency contractor. According to the Oslo Peace, the Peace Research Institute of Oslo, Snowden's leaks of government intelligence programs are apparently having a positive impact on human rights interests around the world.
Right, and the Pope as well. So the five-member Norwegian Nobel Peace Prize Committee receives more than 200, nominations for this prestigious prize. So we'll have to wait and see until October who wins this ultimate peace prize.
It's a big list to whittle down, Kanyang.
Right. All right, Bruce. Thank you so much for today.
No problem.
Well, as for the weather, today was pretty much a repeat of yesterday, very cold and very dry. Not a very pleasant condition. For more, here's our Jiyeon at the Weather Center. Jiyeon.
Hello, Ganyang. It was sunny but cold, as you said, windy and dry day with a dry weather advisory still in place here in Seoul, and cold wave alerts are in effect for many parts of the upper regions. But things will warm up tomorrow afternoon with highs nearing seasonal averages, but we'll still wake up to a very chilly morning. So let's take a closer look at the readings for tomorrow. Daily low here in Seoul will start out at -7 degrees Celsius, -5 for Daegu, and Busan and Jeju will wake up to a low of -1 and 2. And much milder daily highs are expected under mostly sunny skies and a good air quality, with a high peaking to 3 here in Seoul, 6 for Daegu and Gwangju, and Busan and Jeju will top out at 8 and 5. Now it seems like warming trend is on the way starting Wednesday afternoon, just in time for Ipchun this Thursday, which is the first day of the spring according to the East Asian calendars, and things will remain pretty mild through the weekend here in Seoul, but no precipitation is in the forecast for the time being, so things will remain quite dry, so be sure to drink plenty of water to stay hydrated. Now that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
Well, plenty of fun things to do despite the cold weather. That is our broadcast on this Tuesday night. I'm Moon Ganyang. Thank you everyone for watching, and we hope to see you right back here same time tomorrow on NewsCenter.